Hey Arpin, ready for some notebooking?
Let's do some notebooking. Yeah, this is a big one. This is a big one. We have actual material to work with, and we actually have things in our notebooks.
Yeah, exactly.
To discuss. So
busy week in Buffalo.
Busy week in Buffalo. Trying to. I always call it a. I was describing it to someone as panning for gold, and so. When you're panning for gold, you have to deal with a lot of rocks. There's a lot of rocks that you're picking up, and every now and then you get that little nugget of gold. And so that's what Combine Week is a lot of panning, a lot of rocks. And this year, honestly, with the Canadians, not that much gold, really. I mean, we had... I think it's fair to say a pretty good sense of where the Canadians were going to go or what they were going to do coming out of the Combine in each of the last 2 years under this administration. And not the case this year because
they're in a tougher spot this year.
There's just the variability of what's going to happen in front of Montreal at number 5. And I think even within their own decision makers, there might be some differences of opinion this year that could lead to some interesting discussions between now and the draft. So let's get into those.
Sure. So I think who do you want to start with, or because we got many handles or points of attack. Obviously, I think that there is the name Ivan Demidov is on many people's mind, and I think it's the decision that the Chicago Blackhawks will make on him is going to go a long way in determining if the Canadians will be in a position to draft him or not. One thing I wrote in my piece was that I'm coming back from Buffalo thinking that the Canadians might have a better chance at drafting him, or actually being in a position to draft him, than I originally thought they would be. And it's probably the other way around for Caitlin Lindstrom, where I thought, well, the Canadians were in a good setup at number 5 to draft him, but I could easily see a world where Lindstrom is taken before number 5. So there's the Canadians still, I think, still want to preferably draft a forward with number 5. It could be one of those two guys. But I think it's really worth looking at Demidov, especially in the event that Chicago would pass on him at 2, because it's probably not going to be either Anaheim or Columbus's choice. So,
well, I mean, that's the thing. I think that's why when I said, I don't know which episode it was, but when I mentioned that I thought Demidov could be there at 5, it really does come down to Chicago's decision. And so if Chicago decides to go with Lev Shunov, which is where the winds are kind of blowing right now. And my colleague Scott Powers in Chicago has been reporting that the Blackhawks see this as an opportunity to shore up their defense. They lack that physical top pair type. Kevin Korchinski is a great prospect, but they don't have that level of prospect in their pool right now. I think they also view Connor Bedard and while they're very different players, but similarly undersized somewhat, Demidov and Bedard, and so maybe that could be an issue for them. But really, if the Blackhawks were to take Demidov, then that's the scenario in which the Canadians could be forced or persuaded to grab a defenseman at number 5, because that's the scenario where neither Demidov nor Lindstrom would be available potentially at 5. And that's the one thing I came away from the Combine with, is that, we've talked about them trading down, and I think that's something that they will consider, but I really don't think that's something they're going to do ultimately. I don't know if they'll get the proper value for trading down. I think they would risk not getting the player they're trying to get by trading down. And since, and I think that they would just prefer to take, a really good defenseman if they can't get Lindstrom or Demidov at 5 and just call it a day and add. I think they're very fond of Zeev Boyum. That's seems kind of clear here. They took Sam Dickinson out to dinner. I wouldn't read too much into that, just because they also took Cole Eiserman out to dinner. I don't think they're taking him at 5. So it's those dinners are landmines. These teams sometimes, they just might be players that they feel they don't have enough information on what and just need more info on. Not necessarily to pick at 5, but if the Canadiens were to somehow trade up from 26, packaging some roster players and what have you, and get into the teens somehow, then you need some more info on guys that could potentially be available there and could potentially trigger that type of a move. So,
yeah.
But well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, just to kind of finish, it's that scenario of neither Demidov nor Lindstrom being there at 5 would probably go away if Chicago took Lev Shunov. They would have one of the two at least. If not, well, I don't think both will be there, but one of the two should be there at 5. If Chicago goes D and Anaheim goes D, which seems to also be kind of the prevailing wisdom, and then, if Columbus were to take Lindstrom, then Demidov would be there, and I'm not sure Columbus is too high on Demidov personally, but it would be the scenario under which the Canadiens would get one of the two forwards that they covet here.
I think they like Sennecke also, but if Lindstrom's available to them at 4, that looks like a reasonable option for them. But if we leave those two, I just want to pick up on what you were saying about the defenseman. I think, a lot of people say, "Oh, not again, not another defenseman. We've got plenty of those." I think that there's a concern here. The concern is twofold. First is that once Demidov and Lindstrom are off the board, what is the projection of the other guys that come after? Let's say that I'm not saying that's what they think, but let's say they have, in terms of forwards, Celebrini 1, Lindstrom 2, Demidov 3. Let's say that. Then you have the number 4 guy on their list. Do they evaluate him as a future first liner, or they view him as a very good second liner? Mm-hmm. And if they do think that he's not necessarily this impact player, then you have to look at as value asset management and basically what the position of the guy and what his ceiling gives you. And if you're in a position to draft a guy who you think is going to be a first pairing defenseman versus a guy who is not a surefire first liner on your team as a winger, then no matter who you got already in your pipeline, if you strictly go by best player available, that's where you really have to ask yourself that question. The second thing is, yes, the Canadiens have many defensemen, but who's going to be really the guy to drive your offense 5-on-5? And I think that on the power play, if Mailloux and or Hudson pan out, they're good options on the power play, but you need guys that drive your offense also from the back end 5-on-5. And let's face it, it remains a bit risky to put your chips on the table and say, we count on Lane Hudson to be this guy. Mm-hmm. He might well be. He's talented enough for it, but it remains, I think, a somewhat risky play. So if you have more certainty, a guy that offers that sort of value as a first pairing defenseman, as an offensive-minded defenseman, whether he's a lefty or righty, but eases the concerns in terms of the potential, not the potential, but the probability of reaching your potential, then it becomes an interesting consideration to get a a defenseman at 5. But it's going to be compared. I think the Canadians are going to try to establish some tiers and say, okay, well, in this tier, who do we got? In that tier, who do we got? And understand what's really the difference between what could be the next best forward available to them. Let's say whether it's a Tija Ginla or Beckett Sennecke or any other guy versus those defensemen. And I'm not sure if there's a clear-cut answer to that. I think there's still going to be some debate in the coming weeks. But to think that because Kent Hughes was out there saying, after the draft lottery that all things being equal, we'll draft a forward, I think there's been a bit of backtracking in that sense, and people have to get ready for the possibility, maybe not the probability, but the possibility that the Canadians might end up with yet another defenseman.
Well, I mean, the key line there, I don't think he needs to backtrack, because the key thing there is all things being equal. And, I wrote that this weekend, that if all things are not equal, which is the situation you're describing, if they have defensemen, say a Bouillon or a Parik or Dickinson or whoever in one tier, and the forward that's available to them is in the next tier, then all things are not equal. Yeah. That's so it wouldn't even make Kent a liar, really. They would just be like, listen, this guy. And the other thing to kind of hammer your point home is that, you have to look at the draft, or at least the Canadians do look at the draft, as sort of one aspect of it is checking boxes of roles, of things that they need to build a Stanley Cup contender. And I think you're correct in saying that while Lane Hutson might check that box of elite puck moving D, he might not. And so getting that box checked is on an equal footing to getting a top line winger or a top line forward. It's on the same, all those boxes need to get checked to build a Stanley Cup winning team. So, and the other factor here is when you're trying to check those boxes, if the Canadians take any kind of step this year, not even a playoff team, but let's say they get into a realm where they're kind of just a step up from where they were the last 3 years, and they're picking anywhere from 12th to 15th or 10th to 15th or something like that, or even 8th to 15th. Checking those boxes through the draft is going to get more difficult. You're going to have to hope that you have it internally to get those boxes checked. So and again, I think it's pretty clear that, you look at Lindstrom and you look at Demidov, and I agree, you look at Sennecke. I think the Canadians think quite highly of him, and he represents a very interesting sort of development path, similar to Lindstrom, actually, in the sense that, Sennecke grew late, and so kind of acquired all sorts of skills that he did it as a smaller guy, and then all of a sudden is 6'3", kind of a lanky 6'3" right now, but a guy who could fill out and has these sort of small person skills that he's still trying to incorporate into the bigger body he now has. And it's the reason why I say it's similar is Lindstrom's always been a big athletic kid, but he's only played at an elite level of hockey for 4 years. He's not played kind of AAA level hockey his whole life. That happened a bit later in his life. So he's also learning new things with in a relatively short time frame. So that's where I see the similarities between the two, is that there's a lot of room to grow in that sense for Lindstrom when it comes to sort of his hockey sense and his hockey IQ and processing the game at a higher level. And in Sennecke's case, learning how to use his body and learning how to apply his skills to his frame. So, but anyhow, if those, I think personally, those two guys, Lindstrom and Demidov, are there at 5, then then that tier discussion probably gets taken care of, and they can then say, well, all things are equal, and we're going to take this guy, and he's going to check that forward box, because while it is a gamble that Lane Hudson will hit, I think it's a decent gamble. I think everything he's shown has suggested that he has a chance to succeed in the NHL. And while it's not a guarantee, no one's really a guarantee. So, but the box that Caden Lindstrom would check with that size and that speed and that skill and that snarl to his game, and the box that Ivan Demidov would check with his game-breaking ability and just ridiculous amounts of skill, taking into account the risk factor involved with his, I guess, size. His skating's not really elite, and there is, like it or not, a Russia factor involved with him. But those, I think they would jump at the chance to check that box with either one of those guys.
Yeah, and to continue on your theme of checking boxes, I understand the point about the fact that they might look for that defenseman being able to, provide offense and be more secure in that aspect. But at least they've got candidates to fill that role. There might not be any guarantee among any of them, but at least they've got guys that they can be hopeful about. If you look at guys that can feed your top six, let alone your top line, they don't have those guys outside of the NHL right now. So even if you were to go past Demidov and Lindstrom, and you would get to the next tier, whether it's Sennecke or Ginla, I think that there's a case to be made there that these guys would at least give your pipeline some very welcome boost and depth. And right now there's the projections on Iginla might not be like through the roof, but you look at the way that this kid has been developed and the environment in which he is being brought in, the very professional aspects of his mentality and his, obviously with having a guy like Jerome Iginla as your father, who's not only a Hall of Fame player, but a guy who is very well equipped for training. I mean, now he's a head coach, in an academy in Kelowna. But I mean, here's a guy who in his career ticked every box. And we tend to talk maybe or exaggerate the concept of bloodlines, because it's not because you're Cliff Running's son that you're going to play in the NHL. Ty Running is playing in Germany now. But anyway, the examples are numerous. But you have to, on some occasions, you look at you look at both Tkachuk brothers, and it's clear that they are Keith Tkachuk's sons. And there was a good bet. And I feel like when you have Jerome Iginla's son, who's on a great path, he might not now be considered like the highest potential guy, but neither was Jerome Iginla back in 1995 when he was drafted 11th. And he ended up being the most prolific, point producer of his draft class. So I think it's interesting to take these things into considerations. And I think the Canadians do, so that even though what you project now, for whatever the position, might not necessarily be the thing in 5 years, and you have to stay really, focused on or aware of the possibility that what is it that you're going to bring in terms of prospects and for 5 years down the road. And there might be some interesting forwards past Demidov and Lindstrom. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I don't disagree necessarily, but I think that also you got to look at, and they do, how often guys like this come up. And what would be, let's say they draft 10th next year. Could they find an equivalent to teach? And next year's draft class doesn't look nearly as good as this year's draft class, just to say, but the early indications are that there's going to be a bit of a dip in the overall quality of the draft class next year. But you have to look at, okay, well, if we're picking say somewhere between 10th and 14th next year, can we get someone similar to TJ Ginla in that range next year or the year after? And how often do players like this come up? Like, do we see players like this on a regular basis, or are they rare? They definitely looked at Slavkovsky that way. Reinbacher less so, but still, like, the ability to draft a player like that, they considered to be a rare opportunity in the sense that they have the 5th overall pick and he's just sitting there, and then they don't usually get too far in the draft. Those big right shot D, I mean, Levshunov getting past 2 would be a surprise this year, but if he does, he's probably not getting past 3. So they wouldn't have had an opportunity to draft that guy this year. So that's the part of the calculus here. You know, like, they can love Beckett Sennecke, and I think they do. I heard his interview with them was quite impressive. That left them pretty intrigued by the kid, even more so than they were just watching his sort of second half in his playoffs and everything he did. Considered him to be like an intelligent young man, and he responded well to being challenged, and there were some aspects that he did really well in his chat with them. But at number 5, that scarcity of player profile or talent has to be taken into the equation. And when are we going to be able to draft a player like this? And I think, you know, even in Demidov's case, and my colleague Corey Pronman kind of makes the point that there's this other Russian kid who's coming out next year who looks like he's going to be a hell of a winger. And that would make 3 straight years you have kind of this dynamic, highly skilled Russian, somewhat undersized winger available in the draft. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be in the equation. Like, do they consider Ziv Boyum to be a very rare find? Like, everything he does well, and I'm just using him as an example, but like everything that he does well, and when you watch him play, do you think, okay, well, he could be a Cale Makar type impact player? And if that's the case, then the Canadiens don't have that in their pipeline. No, I'm not saying that's the case, but I mean, this is part of the decision-making process, and how the Canadiens are going to look at these players. They have to, you know, they have to have a real sober look at their own pipeline and what they have in the system, and say, okay, well, do we have that player? And if they don't, they have to go get him. You know, and it also, if they don't, can they say, can we draft that guy next year? That's another part of the equation. And guys like Cale Makar don't come around every year.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, I'm not sure if Ziv Boyum is Cale Makar. There's going to be, on some teams' evaluations, he might be like the number 5 defenseman on some lists. You know, some teams will value not only Levshunov more, but they'll value Salayev more. They'll value Dickinson more. You know, so
correct.
It's or Zane Perek. That's right. Yeah. So it's really tricky. It's really, really tricky. So that's why I think that this year is the most difficult year to project in quite a while for the Montreal Canadiens. Even though, and it's a difficult spot to be in, because the more you reflect on it, you say, okay, it forces you to analyze what you really have. Not only because spontaneously everybody says, well, the Canadiens need help up front. Yeah, that's true. But if they consider that they don't have a number 1 defenseman in terms of driving offense who's more of a sure bet, you add this to the fact that they don't have all that elite talent up front that could turn them into contenders. That means that it's a team that, even in taking into account their pipeline, still ways away from being a contending team. So
yeah, but it's I think one point that why it's so difficult this year. Like, you look at all the defensemen we just named, right? And we didn't even mention like Carter Yakimchuk, who I think in a normal draft year, you get maybe 2 of these guys, and then there's another tier. This year, there's a group of 6 or 7 defensemen who you can make a legitimate argument deserve to be top 5 picks. And it's just exceedingly rare, especially, you know, having a Perek and a Boyum in the same draft year is rare. Usually well, actually, usually there's no guys like this, but if you get one, there's one, and the
Yeah.
Levshunov kind of Dickinson, like these guys, the fact that there's so many of them, the Canadians can't look at it and say, well, we used the number 5 pick last year on linebacker, so we can't take one of these guys. Like it's a rare opportunity because that group in a normal draft year, you would probably not have any talent commensurate to that group available to you outside of the top 5. And so, and really, it's just that unique of a draft year that there's so many of these guys available that you need to make that calculation. And that's, I think the Canadians feel like Dickinson, for instance, is a phenomenal defenseman. I think he's going to be a really good NHLer. His floor is super high. There's so much to like about him, but the Canadians kind of have that profile of defenseman where it's kind of project. I mean, Caden Gooley is not as offensively talented as Sam Dickinson is, but sort of fills that role for them, and they know what they have in him, And so you can look at this group and say, well, are there any profiles we're missing? And to me, Parekh and Boyum stand out in the sense that they don't necessarily have that. And
Right.
That's an opportunity unto itself. And if you're helping the offense, what difference does it make if you're helping it as a forward or as a defenseman? It doesn't make that big of a difference as long as the offense improves.
Hockey. Yeah.
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 So, and really having a defenseman like that makes the forwards you have already better, offensively at least, because in theory the puck's in the offensive zone more often. But I think sounds like we're trying to make the argument that the Canadians should take a defenseman at number 5, which we're not doing. It's just that I think, again,
I'd rather see one of their prospects in their pipeline pan out and be that guy, even if it's a little bit by committee.
Yeah, but even I think they would prefer to get a forward at that spot. I think that should be made clear. Like it's not as if, but it's just that it just seems like, and I think I was guilty of it. You were too. Like it really sounded like almost a non-negotiable kind of thing, or a mandated thing from the front office that we're going to take a forward at 5, and I don't think that's the case. That it's not. It's not. They're not going to make. They're not going to make an egregious scouting error just to pick a specific position this year.
Right. Yeah. The one downside, though, is that both Boyum and Parekh are 6 feet tall. They're not especially big. I mean, Zane Parekh is 178. The thing is, you cannot have two.
Boyum was smiling ear to ear that he got to 6 foot. He was beaming. I mean, he was beaming. I was like, I'm at 6, and Macklin didn't get to 6, and Eiserman didn't get to 6, and I did. And he was super happy about it.
Right. But I think it was rounded out at 6 for all 3 of them. But in the official, the latest official listings. But still, I mean, I think that the Canadians and other teams also are conscious that you cannot have too many smaller sized defensemen. So to which extent, if you hope one day to have a Boyum or a Parekh in your lineup, does it, it bears bad news for Lane Hutson, doesn't it?
It might for sure. I mean, it's, it might. Well, it would just create a competition environment for him that would make his path probably more difficult for sure, 100%. But again, and I think the Canadians have a lot of belief in Lane Hutson, and that's why I think if one of the forwards that they really like are there, that they would take him, because they're willing to gamble on Lane Hutson making it, but it's a gamble. They recognize that as well. There's some element of a gamble to it, but I don't consider it much of a gamble personally. I don't think they do either. But it would be doing some serious gymnastics here to justify, taking one of the either a Ginlo or Sennecke. And no, that's not fair to say, but I think they would be drafting by position if they took Sennecke or Ginlo over one of those two guys. That's kind of the impression I get.
Yeah.
At
But
five,
it's
I
not
should
as
say.
though
Like with the number 5 pick specifically. Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to Demidov and the situation with St. Petersburg, because people have been hearing that of the possibility that Matvei Mishkov might come to Philadelphia maybe as soon as next season. So when we hear that it might be difficult for Russian players to come over, especially those who play for the SKA organization, and in St. Petersburg, it's a flagship team in Russia, and they've gained a reputation of playing hardball in letting their guys go, and plus there seems to be a bigger willingness as time goes by from the political side of things, from a certain guy on top, which we'll call him fries, gravy, and cheese curds. Yeah, there's a willingness to retain that talent and make sure that there's you can showcase from inside the country the best players. So there's a debate there, because Mishkov might be leaving, but Demidov, whose contract ends at the end of next season, nobody can say for sure that it's going to be okay, and after his next contract he's going to come. Yes, he's represented by Daniel Milstein, and that agent has proven over the past few years like an ability to bring his guys over. But there's the read right now is very, very murky when it comes to SKA's level of resistance in letting talents such as Demidov go. So, and I think that you cannot. Maybe that one of the reasons why they might not hold dear as much on Mishkov than they might on Demidov is also might be the same reasons why some teams decided to pass on Mishkov, and that has to do with who he is as a hockey player. And on the ice, in terms of personality, in terms of how he approaches the game, Demidov is a very different player to Mishkov. So they might acknowledge that and make it even more difficult to let the player go.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, the top teams in the KHL, SKA, Dynamo, and CSKA specifically, I mean, it's hard to untangle the political environment in Russia right now to those teams. It's intertwined, and so it just creates an element of unknown. I mean, the case of what happened to Fedotov, I think resonates with a lot of teams. Like the position the Flyers were put in after signing that kid to a contract, having him literally carted off the ice into a van and taken to a military camp. I think that resonates with some teams. And so, yes, Demidov has resisted signing an extension with SKA, has told them he doesn't want to because he wants to go to North America. Sometimes St. Petersburg has trouble taking no for an answer. Like it's just like there's a persistence there, and pressure valves and various things that they could do to persuade a player to make more of a commitment to them. And the fact that Demidov initially made the team out of training camp this season and Michkov did not, kind of gives you a sense of who they value between the two. And if Michkov does wind up coming to North America this year, it's a further indication of how they feel about him. I got the sense that they would like to have Demidov in their lineup next year. And they're not going to put him in their lineup if he doesn't have a contract extension. In fact, they're going to make it they're likely to make it kind of difficult on him if he doesn't sign that extension, and he might find himself in the MHL again, which would be total waste of time for him. But yeah,
Yes.
it's a factor. Having Milstein as an agent helps. The fact that most of the top Russian kids eventually do come to the NHL helps, but it definitely creates an unknown element in his case, a wild card element that goes beyond evaluating him as a hockey player. But ultimately, mm, and a lot of the same concerns, that go beyond evaluating Michkov as a hockey player last year. I mean, the fact that he had 3 years left on his contract, and it seemed at the time ironclad, and that Scott would never let him out of it, was a factor for some teams. Although I think most of the teams that passed on him for other reasons. Arizona, obviously he didn't even take an interview with them. He didn't seem the least bit interested in signing with that organization. So why would they take him? But, Mike Greer mentioned things about his game, him as a hockey player, that they didn't feel comfortable using the number 4 pick on. I think Montreal felt the same way. So he got to Philadelphia, I mean, it's, the 3-year contract is one of many things, but it did definitely, the fact that you didn't have any control over his development, that you wouldn't even be able to talk to him much. We had Daniel Briere on the radio recently talking about how, he hasn't really talked to Michkov all year. I think their scouting director does Zooms with him, and they have to use like Google Translate on their phones to communicate, and it's just not ideal. So just a lot of things that complicate the Demidov situation, but I think he's going to be able to clear some of these things up in about a week, June 18th in Florida. Him and several of Dan Milstein's clients who are playing in Russia, including some of those that are playing here. I think Levshunov's going to be there. I believe Parek's going to be there. And so Demidov will have a chance to talk to these teams, even if though he's not expected to get on the ice, which they'll be coming like an on-ice element to that camp, or that showcase, I guess. But he'll be able to speak to teams face to face and tell them how he feels about his contract situation. I think that will probably alleviate a lot of these questions that a lot of teams have about him.
Right. And that, who knows, that might push him back into the driver's seat in the eyes of the Chicago Blackhawks. So
yeah,
we'll see,
perhaps.
because right now he's the thing that Levshunov has on him in the eyes of Chicago is that they've seen, Levshunov's been pretty much in their backyard playing in Michigan State. They've seen him a ton. So there's been a lot more contact. So there's an understanding of who he is and how he is, and also I think the proper evaluation of the level of play. Whereas in the MHL, there's such a disparity because there's a lot of teams, right? And there's a disparity between the best teams and the worst teams. So Demidov has been doing magic stuff over the course of the season, but if you're not there, sometimes it's hard to properly gauge and understand the level of play and see, if it's sometimes being on site makes you get a better feel for that,
No, not sometimes, every time. Every time.
Yeah.
And NHL teams take that very seriously now. The Canadiens did go and did get some live viewings on Demidov, and a lot of the Russian. Listen, it's a really good class of Russian players this year. There are a lot of Russians who should go in the first 2 rounds, and not that many teams got in to see them. Canadiens are one of them. I don't know who the others are, but there's not that many, and so. So yeah, being able to see Levshunov
Columbus has a Russian scout.
Yeah, no, I know, but several teams have Russian scouts. What I'm talking about is actual front office decision makers getting in to get live viewings, like scouting directors or assistant GMs or whatever. Like that level of management, not that many teams were able to get in. So,
right.
So yeah, there's that for sure. And having Levshunov, having seen him, watched him for 2 years now in North America, probably creates a great deal of comfort. Plus just positional value, right? I mean, it's you know, dynamic wingers, again, going back to the whole scarcity thing. Yes, Demidov's a supremely talented player, but dynamic offensive wingers pop up relatively frequently, whereas big right shot, mobile defensemen, all around two-way defensemen like Levshunov are less frequent.
Yeah, but that level of skill though is they pop up every year, but you have to be able to draft that very high in the draft to get them. That's still the issue.
I think Chicago can reasonably expect to be able to be high in the draft.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of Montreal. Yeah, I was thinking of Montreal, but yes, for Chicago, the Chicago's going to be there for a bit. Yeah, no doubt about that. I was, even though we're going to have a mailbag a bit later, I just wanted to squeeze in a question that we received from our friend Joel, who says that he was asking us about, the injury to, comparing the injury to Demidov, who had some knee issues over the course of the year. Obviously, he didn't finish the playoffs in the MHL for that reason. Yeah. And comparing that to Lindstrom's back injuries. So he says he feels that Lindstrom's back injury has been overblown for two reasons. First, that because he's a freak athlete and always has been. And apparently his injury was muscular and not structural. So I cannot comment confidently on that. And second of all, he says that several top prospects got injured. So Demidov, Sennecke, Katin. So Demidov in particular may be more injury prone as he cuts inside all the time. And in the NHL, he will get hit or clipped often. And no one mentions this. And Lindstrom, Joel argues, as the highest pure ceiling in the draft. And I don't think that it's a hot take. So if we just take those two guys together, because again, they're probably the most obvious options for Montreal at 5 if they were in a position to draft either one of those guys. Is it fair to be more concerned about Lindstrom's injury compared to Demidov's injury?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that's why it was so important that his agent at Wasserman provided the medical reports, which included the MRI from when the injury actually happened. So they're pretty detailed reports that all of the teams, Canadians included, transferred to their physicians and are going to have a good look at. Lindstrom's been skating regularly. He's been in the gym for a while. He did the pull-ups at the combine, which I was surprised by, but just kind of showed that he's been doing pull-ups for weeks in preparation. Pull-ups would put a pretty big strain on someone's back. Of all the things you would think he wouldn't do, that would be the one thing that I would think he wouldn't do, and he did it. But yeah, the scrutiny is fair in the sense that a back could become a chronic issue. And that's not to say that a knee won't. But the back is central to everything you do as an athlete. Every part of your body basically is connected to your back. And so if that becomes chronic, then that's going to be a problem. So the burden of proof is on Lindstrom and obviously his doctors to show that it won't be a chronic issue and that this will not be something that recurs all the time, which they are relatively confident that NHL teams will be able to determine for themselves. And they felt that's why they tried to be as transparent. They tried to get ahead of it as much as they could because they know that's the big concern. And it is a concern. Yeah. And really, if you take that out of the equation, I don't think there's that many other concerns about him. It's
about Lindstrom?
About Lindstrom. Yeah. Like the projectability of his game. Yes, the processing and sort of the decision making on the ice, people have questions about that. But if you look at where he's at in his progression in that regard, I think it's also easy to see that that's something that he's still developing and that he's not a finished product in that sense. Like, hockey IQ, you can debate whether hockey IQ is innate or whether it can be taught or what have you. One thing that I don't think is debatable or controversial is to say that hockey IQ is developed over a certain amount of time and over a certain number of reps that you see in hockey games, that you develop a hockey IQ. You get a data bank of situations and visual key points on the ice that you can access in a split second and know what to do in those situations. Well, that takes time to develop that data bank, and I don't think Lindstrom has had the same amount of time as a lot of players in his position have
sure.
to build that data bank up. But the injury itself, I think it's a fair question that Joel asks. The knee injury, Demidov's knee injury. The one thing about the knee injury with Demidov too is that his skating is not his calling card. So, I don't think there would be that much of a fear that he would become much of a different player if his skating were somewhat impacted by his knee injury. But I mean, that's how I see that.
But I think that Lindstrom, one of the things that seem very enticing to me is the fact that he's very raw, that he's really a diamond that needs to be polished. He's not a guy that seems to be close to being a finished product. To think that before he was 14 years old, he was living in a remote community, small village, 2,500 people, where he didn't have a rink, from the end of March until the next season. So that forced him to play other sports, which is always very well viewed but by scouts. They would like to see guys, develop their not only their skills, but their athleticism through other sports until they're at an age where they can really focus solely on hockey. But in their development, it's good to play many sports, and that's what he's been doing a little bit, because he had to do it because he didn't have ice in the summer. But that athleticism has proven to be really his calling card, and something that teams can bank on. And the fact that he's been progressing so fast. He was, when he first got at the academy in Delta, that's run by Brendan Gallagher's father. There was a guy there, Miguel Marquez, who finished the season with double the amount of points than Lindstrom had in the same number of games. And now, I mean, not even 3 years later, Lindstrom's in the discussion, like pretty much a surefire top 5 pick. And Marquez on this might end up being a late second, maybe third round pick. So he covered so much ground and closed the gap in such a impressive way. And it was even more true this year, because the first half of the season that he played, he made such a big leap forward, even compared to last year, that teams will look at this guy and say, with this physical specimen that we have in front of us, and the fact that he's able to make such gains year after year, sky must be the limit. And we'll be able to teach him, because he didn't have like the fancy coaching that some of those kids have had when they were 8-9 years old. Well, we'll be able to improve his IQ, his hockey IQ, and the little details in his game that might be missing. But the raw product is super enticing.
Yeah, totally. And plus, the other advantage he has on Demidov is that teams have had to sort of research and make calls and use their contacts to find out what kind of kid Demidov actually is. They haven't been able to ascertain that for themselves by and large. Whereas Lindstrom is just a very likable kid. Like, he is like, and I think that teams take that to heart. You mentioned Marquez, and I asked him about him, and when he got to Delta, like, what did you think of this guy? And it's just, everyone who's come across this kid is really taken in by how humble and sincere, genuine, good person he is. Like, it's just, and coming from his background, a single mom who had to work like crazy while she was in school to get her 4 kids through life. His grandparents, who they lived with, and he mentioned his grandfather Lance as being sort of the father figure in his life, taught him, gave him his competitive spirit. He told a funny story how, when he started to play catch with his grandfather when he was just a little kid, most of the time you kind of try and lob the ball to your kid when you're playing catch with him. Lance would just zing him right at his head and force him to catch the ball at that age. Which reminded me of the story you mentioned, Ian Gallagher. I actually told this story to Caden, and it's not in the piece I wrote. So, when Brendan Gallagher was a kid, there was a friend of the family who was there, and he was playing soccer, and Brendan was in nets. And so he was like 6 or 7 or something. And so the guy's like, he's taking little shots. He's not being too. And so Ian would come running in and being like, "What are you doing? Don't take it easy on him. Fire that ball, fire it." So they start zinging soccer balls at Brendan Gallagher as the little Brendan Gallagher. So it reminded me of that story, and Caden laughed because obviously he knows Ian very well and has trained with him for the last 3 years. So, but yeah, it's that character equation of it that gives him an edge, like it or not. The Canadians are going to, not just the Canadians, every team who wants to is going to get a chance to talk to him in Florida, obviously, next week. But you don't have the wealth of knowledge on who he is as a person compared to, Lindstrom or any other prospect in this draft, really. And so that's a factor here that needs to be kept in mind. And I think, that's it weighs in Lindstrom's favor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, if we move on a little bit to maybe stuff that we might have heard regarding the team improving in the shorter term. I think there's obviously there's a draft that's coming up, but the Canadians are going to be trying to they're going to try to get better over the course of the summer. There's no doubt about that. You had an interesting tidbit regarding Trevor Zegras and the fact that Pat Verbeek has called the Canadians and was pretty aggressive in his offer, right?
Well, no, I mean, I think that was kind of taken out of context. I didn't.
Okay.
I don't have what Anaheim offered. I can't believe something I said was taken out of context, but it's it was kind of based on what I've heard. They're going to be aiming
make sure
high.
To put so much context all the time.
Exactly. I know, too much context actually. But yeah, like the whole Gooley Reinbacher thing. I mean, that was that was me saying if I were Anaheim, that's what I would ask for, and I don't think the Canadians would do that. So,
okay.
But that is the type of piece that the Ducks will be looking for, and that's why. And you look at the Natchez situation, and it's similar. Elliot Friedman had on 32 Thoughts recently that the Hurricanes are looking for a star level prospect. That's what I heard as well, that they're looking for a star in return, preferably a young star who's just on the verge of kind of breaking out. And when you look at the Canadians, like it's in both those situations, their wealth right now is draft picks and young defensemen. It's not stars.
Yeah.
They're not overflowing with stars. So in order for a move to make sense for them, they have to feel they're getting better, as you mentioned, and trading a star player away just to get one in return at another position, maybe. I'm not sure they would see that as getting better, because they don't have an excess of that quality of player that they can say, okay, we can lose this guy to address a need somewhere else. In the end, when you make the final calculation, is the team better as a result?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. No, but I think that the Hurricanes they sense that there's a significant level of interest for Martin Necas, and they'll be able to drive the price up.
Yeah.
Whereas Trevor Zegras, I think his value has been higher in the past than it is now.
For sure.
And Yeah,
They could
and
also just keep
so
him. I mean,
they could.
I think Verbeek
They
would like
could.
to trade him, but he doesn't have to. You know, I mean, he's got 2 years left on his bridge deal. They could try and build that value back up because you're right.
Yeah.
It's not as high as it once was. So they could just give him a chance to play. And like Greg Cronin really went out of his way when he was in Montreal to make it clear how much he likes the guy.
Mm.
Whether that was 100% sincere or not is for other people to judge. But like I was there. If that wasn't sincere, it was quite a performance because he went on for like 10 minutes about how coachable he is, how much he embraced the things that Cronin was asking of him. And he just had an injury plagued year. He had a tough world championship. It's possible that if Verbeek goes out there and sees that the demand or what people are offering to get him isn't to his liking, he doesn't have to move.
Yeah. But so we constantly, I think regarding Nechas, and I mean, we've been talking about those two guys ad nauseum, and I think for good reason, because there's in that category of players, there's not a ton of guys that fit in terms of age, in terms of availability, also where they could, they could possibly be targets for Montreal. But I think that they're, as I said, the Hurricanes are in a position where they can ask for more. They can, and they're asking stuff that the Canadians probably don't have right now. So in both cases, I see this as unlikely acquisitions for Montreal. You might mention other names. I mean, there was somebody in the mailbag a few weeks ago that mentioned Nick Ehlers. I don't see it either. I think that Konechny would be a great ad, but he's eligible to sign an extension with Philadelphia in July 1st, and they don't expect any big trouble in having it done there. So he's going to remain in Philly. Patrick Laine, it's really a big question mark. So there's a significant amount of risk, both in terms of his own personal situation, the dollar amount that comes with it. So
The acquisition cost probably wouldn't be that high though.
That's right. It could be an interesting gamble.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that there's a different way, and I was not too dialed in on that before, but I think that when it comes to free agency, there might be a consideration now to improve the team on the short term through free agency. And so the cap is going up. The Canadians are aware that they're going to have many young players getting new contracts, so they don't want to necessarily tie themselves up to an older player who will get too much money in the long run. But for a year or two, making sure that they provide Kirby Dach with a guy who can play on that second line and help the Canadians as a whole, the Canadians offense as a whole, to just make a step forward for the next couple of years. I think this is going to be in consideration. So,
well, yeah, if they could keep it to 2 years, I think the Canadians would be extremely interested. The question is whether they can find someone that could keep it to 2 years, or that would be willing to keep it to 2 years, and who's available, and who wants to play in Montreal, and who checks that box for them.
Right. But they'll be in a position where they can overpay. That's the thing. If it's 2 years, I think they'll be fine to pay more than what the market suggests.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it means keeping it as if he keeps the term rather short. Yeah.
And so, I mean, a guy who would be a candidate for that would be a guy like David Perron.
No doubt about that.
Like he's probably wouldn't mind finishing his career in Quebec. I don't know where it stands with the Red Wings, but he's 35, so it's he can't be asking for too much term, and has been a remarkably consistent offensive player throughout his 30s. Like, this guy is going to get you 50 points, more or less. He had 47 in 76 games last year, 56 in 82 games the year before, 57 in 67 games the year before that, 58 in 56 games the year before that. I mean, these are all years that were played in his 30s. Like, this is arguably the best stretch of his career came from age 29 onward. So if you
Yeah.
want a guy who's going to improve your offense and provide a top six option, could play just as easily on a third line for a couple of years, he could make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So now the what I've heard is that the communication is still on with the Red Wings, and his priority is to remain in Detroit. But we'll see. I mean, there has been discussions with Montreal in the past, many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't pan out. And eventually, he went back. He went back to St. Louis. So that must have been the summer of 2016. But now, yeah, he's to me, he would be a fit. He would be a
Yeah,
fit for that sort of aim, that sort of thing that they want to accomplish, because they don't want to be a one line team next year. They want to solidify their offense. They want to make sure that
they don't want to be a one power play team either.
that's true. That's
Yeah,
true. But I mean, you add Dak and you add like a top six guy in the fold. Well, that's interesting because that automatically gives you more weapons on the second line. So
mm-hmm.
they might want to try Joshua Roy there. They might, or they'll want to keep Alex Newhook on the wing. So they want to give themselves some options. So that's something that we're going to keep an eye on, because the trade route. I mean, there can be some guys that we're not thinking of, and
I think there are
it
for
would come
sure
as a
some guys.
surprise.
I think there are for sure some guys that we're not thinking of. I really think the
Yeah,
Canadians from on the trade front, there's going to be some sort of creative, outside the box kind of trade that we're not anticipating of some sort. I really believe that. Like it's not,
yeah,
it's not necessarily going to be the obvious thing. I mean, you know, not to keep, but when they traded for Kirby Doc, it kind of blew everyone's minds because it was like, man, it's who would have thought you could trade Romanov and get a pick from the Islanders and move that to get Doc? Like that was a very outside the box, creative way of acquiring a player. And I feel, when we were talking about the Natchez thing, maybe there is a team out there who needs draft picks and who needs young defensemen and have a star caliber player that the Canadians could go get with something that they have in excess and then take that player and flip him to Carolina. Like that's
for
something that
sure. Well, that's a
I
point.
think,
That's a point that I made in my article earlier this week about that like in to do it like in two sequence in two trades coming in the
well,
sequence.
yeah, I mean, they need to find a team that wants to buy what they're selling, and what they're selling is attractive to some teams and it's less attractive to others, like Carolina. So there's not a lot of teams. Well, there are a few teams that have as many draft picks as them, and so like Utah being one of them, and so like there's there's going to be some competition in this specific kind of market where teams looking for draft picks have options, but
Yeah,
that's an avenue the Canadians can use, and so yeah, while I think the trade market, I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't make some sort of deal that we are not anticipating. And
yeah. Because it's funny because we think of trades, let's say, for example, three-way trades as being these complicated deals, and
mhm.
they never happen. But more and more, there's not a lot of trades in the NHL, but the trades have never been as complicated and as complex as they are now. So it's the new norm now to, you retain some salary, you put all sorts of clauses, draft protection things.
Or
It's very convoluted.
but yeah,
So
but we're
I
coming
think
out of
that
the flat cap era, though. I mean, it was convoluted. It was
exactly.
made more convoluted by the flat cap, and so that's not. I think it's going to.
But teams are geared now to think that way. They've gained a certain level of comfort in making teams that are more making trades that are more complicated. And as you pointed out, the Doc trade, turning Romanov into Doc, basically, is a way of thinking that might have seemed like it was far fetched years ago,
Mhm.
but this Canadians management proves that this is something that's perfectly feasible for them. And on that note, I would ask you: do you think that to which extent do you still think that the 26th pick overall would be part of something like that?
I would put it at 75%.
Yeah.
They'll use it. They won't be picking 26th in the draft, I don't think. Whether they use that to move up in the draft, I think that's a possibility. Whether they use that to go get a player, that's a possibility. Like the 26th pick in the draft, the log jam on defense, I mean, if I had to ballpark it, that's how I would ballpark it. Now, does that mean they're going to do it? Listen, they need to find a team that's interested in that pick. They need to find a team that has a player that interests the Canadians. They need to find a team that is looking for the defensemen that they're offering, or the players that they're offering even. I shouldn't even limit to defensemen, but the young players that might be out there on trade talks. A lot of things need to fit, but
Yeah.
I'd be pretty surprised if the Canadians walked up on stage in Vegas and made the 26th pick in the draft. That would surprise me.
I like the idea of trading up personally. I think that there's still, we talk about the fact that there's maybe 14 guys that are first tier, but there's a second tier of prospects after that seems to finish before 26. And if you can move up and get closer to 20, or in the late teens or whatever, there's an interesting slot of prospects there that could be of interest, whether it's Stian Solberg, the Norwegian defenseman, obviously Caden Lindstrom's teammate in Medicine Hat, Andrew Basha. I think that I heard that Jet Luchenko, that not necessarily everybody have very high on their list, is going to be drafted earlier than a lot of people think. So he's the that right winger from Storm, but I think he played some center there too. But there are options that
kid is stacked,
could be warranted.
I don't know if you saw him on testing day.
Yeah, and
he's not very tall, but he is stacked. It's crazy.
Yeah,
he's just a physical specimen.
And I know, and he's the guy who's going to win you that face off, and he's competitive. And I know that the comparisons to Patrice Bergeron are thrown around left, right, and center, but I've heard this type of comparison, at least in the style of play. We won't predict a Hall of Fame career to any of those kids, but anyway, I think that the compliments were quite high. So I think there's a good echelon of prospect to be had there, but at 26, it might have, it might already have vanished.
Oh no, it will have fallen off the cliff. And, quite frankly, the Canadians taking Cole Eiserman out for dinner, and people might look at that and be puzzled by it, but to me, it's a tell that they're considering trying to move into a range where Cole Eiserman would make some sense. It's not, I think the natural assumption is to say that, oh, well, maybe if they trade down, they could take Cole Eiserman with whatever pick they wind up with at 5. But the opposite is also true. If they're able to use 26 and some of their assets to get into a range where maybe Cole Eiserman is falling in the draft and they have just a trade on the back burner with the team, and if they said they could tell the team, if he's available at pick X, let's pull the trigger and let's do it. Yeah. That to me is what that dinner invite was probably more geared towards getting information on than any thought of trading down from 5 or what have you.
Well, when you have a scoring dimension the way Eiserman has, you have to understand what's the deal with this kid. Why did he fall off so much in the rankings over the course of the season? Yet, yes, there's a part of it that he's seen as a one-dimensional player. But Eiserman told me that the feedback that he received throughout those interviews at the Combine was that teams like the fact that he understands where he needs to develop and get better. But he says a lot of teams gave me credit for being better than I thought I was in certain areas of my game. So maybe that, and there's a lot. He's a guy. sometimes he'll talk about himself at the third person, which is something that I really dislike. Ricky Anderson does it, but Ricky
Yeah.
Anderson's the best leadoff hitter in the history of baseball. So that kid has not been drafted yet. So this is a bit too much. But overall, the uber confidence that he exudes can be a good thing. And he's also a kid that he's got some military background in his family. I think that his dad's a state trooper too. But anyway, there's this idea of the hierarchy, and when you're being told something, you do it. It's useful when you don't challenge everything and you're being told something and you do it and you respond to what mom says, what dad says. It's from a coaching perspective, it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Because it'll mean that the guy will try to apply what's being asked of you. So, he's not a candidate at 5. But if the Canadiens were trying to move up, and when you think of it, pieces like if the Canadiens consider that they have an overflow of defensemen and they're open to trading guys like Justin Barron or Harris, they won't get you the top 6 guy that you want. But if you attach one of those guys with a 26, then it enables you to go up and maybe improve your draft ranking for that second first round pick. And I think there's something there.
No, I think so too. And so, yeah, we'll see. It's funny. I actually met Cole Eiserman at the draft last year. He was there with his agent, and his agent just kind of wanted him to get, and it's just amazing to me. And I brought that up with him at the combine. He's like, yeah, that was a great experience, but it's just incredible to me how much his profile has changed from that time. Like at that time, he was the second best player in this draft, if not challenging Macklin Celebrini for the top pick. And just night and day when you compare the two players since that time. So it's a lot to handle for a young kid, and just all of a sudden you're considered one of the best players in your age group and have been considered that for quite some time. All of a sudden you watch these rankings and you see your name dropping and you get a bit of a chip on your shoulder, a bit of an FU attitude about you, and sometimes it can be beneficial, but oftentimes what happens, I find, is these kids that fall like that, they fall for a reason, and it turns out to be telling of how the career winds up. Like we've seen it before with kids who fall out of, let's say, a top 10 projection into the late teens or the 20s, and it's pretty rare that player winds up proving all those people wrong. It's more often than not the fall was justified, so we'll see. Maybe Cole Eiserman will be one of those guys that proves a lot of people wrong.
Well, that's why gauging the character of the kid and understanding more about him helps you handicap the chances of him bouncing back and taking this message that the whole scouting community is sending him, taking the message the right way in order to bounce back and prove everybody wrong. Or so you need to at least check if he's got the right mindset and the right attitude going forward, and not just play the victim or say I'm misunderstood or I'm much better than that. It's this guy's fault or that coach's fault or whatever. How do you explain what happened, and how open are you to getting better and reclaim a place that you think is yours? So
one thing I would add on Cole Eiserman is, did you when he was sitting there for his media availability, did you notice his legs? He's got massive legs, like just these tree trunk thighs. Like they just look like just a really powerful. I don't know. I was talking to him. Well, not just me, but a bunch of people were talking to him, and all of a sudden I just kind of looked down. I was like, oh my God, his legs are massive. So yeah, I think there's elements of his game that he definitely feels, but I think a number of his teammates at the program also feel have been somewhat underrated and wrongly judged. But yeah, I would, to get back to the original question, that 26th pick, there's a whole variety of categories of transactions that can happen with that pick. And I think one of them would be to package it with some current players to try and move up. And that dinner was maybe a bit of a tell on that. We do a mailbag every Monday, you know.
Let's go to the mailbag. Let's go to the mailbag.
Mailbag.
You know, they reach out and they write to us.
Okay, I don't think that we've ever started our mailbag as late in a podcast as we do today, but let's answer a few questions because you were very generous in your offerings again this week. There's plenty of them. So Arpin, I'll let you pick the first one.
Sure. Well, let's pick a quick one. This was from on X from Bale Joe.
Yeah, Bale Joe. Yeah.
How tall was Beckett Sennecke? Keep seeing people say he's 6'4" now, and he wasn't on the list of officially measured prospects. That's because he did not test. He's still not recovered from his injury, but he did speak to the media, and he's 6'3", so he's not 6'4". I'm 6'3", and he looks 6'3" to me. So, but I think you were mentioning that NHL.com had updated their heights and had him at 6'3". Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. He's he's listed at 6'3", 182.
Yeah,
you understand that he's still a very lanky kid. He's got room to grow because he's been pushed around quite a bit. But there's also the fact that you got when you grow so fast. I mean, he grew 2 inches, I think, in a year. Something like that. It's something insane.
He grew like 2 inches a year for a couple of years, if I'm not mistaken. I got to go back and listen to what he said. But yeah, he's been growing quite consistently for the last couple of years. Like pretty.
So in terms of balance, it's he's got some adjustments. He's got to understand his body, his new body, and with the new possibilities, it's the new downloads.
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah.
So there you go. He's 6'3".
Okay. Okay. Here from Simon Joly, Jayden Struble had crushed several of the physical tests during his own combine year. Are there any lesser known or middle of the pack prospects that did surprisingly well with their own tests this year? And yeah, I got a few names for you. Thank you, Simon. So I think that the guy who really stood out, if you look at the results of the different tests, was E.J. Emery. So that's the US NTDP defenseman, right-handed defenseman. If the Canadians were to keep their 26th pick, he's a guy I would look at. So he's just a phenomenon, physical phenomenon. He's a guy who played a lot of football. He was a running back, and now he's a guy for now who's more the stay-at-home / physical type more than offensive. But he's been identifying himself to Keandre Miller, and funny enough, Keandre Miller was drafted also in the early 20s of his draft year. So he was probably the winner of the physical tests at the combine. A couple of guys though, Dean Letourneau, like this humongous kid, 6'7",
6'6.5".
Anyway,
6'6.5". Yeah,
right. So he did very well. Luchenko, I mentioned him earlier. He did great too. A couple of Quebec kids, Alexis Bernier and Maxime Massé, stood out. And Atos Koivu too, he did pretty well. So Saku's son, who didn't think he would be at the combine a year ago, and it was a pleasant surprise for him and a testament to the hard work he put in, but also to the fact that he too grew quite a bit, and he's still not a big kid, far from it, but at least he's big enough to have a chance now, and so he hopes to be drafted in the first. Between the second and the fourth round. So, but he did good at the tests. So
yes, he did. He was yeah. There's no big surprise with EJ Emery. I mean, his athleticism is very well known by it's his calling card. So yeah, but he did crush it. Cole Baudouin is another one that is a first round kind of talent who is a physical freak of sorts. So and just really really fine tuned on his conditioning for sure. Jake Mack asks, I think we kind of addressed this, but is the interest in one of the puck moving D, if Lindstrom and Demidov are gone, a tell by this management that this back end isn't good enough yet to follow that up? Even if they get their forward target, they need to address getting an elite puck moving D in the future. So we've addressed that largely in the show already, but I just add, it's not, if they were to draft a D, it would not be a tell. The tell would be that they don't have this type of defenseman in their system. It doesn't mean that their defense is not good enough. They're just trying to fill a hole. And we've obviously discussed it extensively, but I mean, I've seen people say that if they take a D at number 5, it would be an admission that they made a mistake to take David Reinbacher. Or if they take a D at number 5, it means their D is not good enough yet. Like, there's all these things like taking a defenseman at number 5 would be an admission of something, of some sort of error, and it's just not the case. Like we've gone on about it in this episode. I don't think, but I think it's important to note that taking a defenseman at number 5 would not be admitting anything. I think they still think just as highly of David Reinbacher as they did a year ago, and taking a defenseman at 5 wouldn't be any indication otherwise. So,
no, absolutely. Maxime Pema asks how much Bobrov's relations, especially his father, helps the Habs regarding Demidov, either to help have a better grasp of the player, or if SKA has any intention of playing hardball with the kid. That's an interesting question, Maxim, because Nick Bobrov, I think, is extremely well connected with SKA St. Petersburg. Obviously, with his dad still connected to the team himself. So I think that I would assume that he's got a better knowledge of the reality of how things operate right now than some other teams that might not have the same connections that he does. Does he mean that he knows for sure that what they're going to do or what they want? I don't think so. I could not assume that. But if I had to pick between a head scout who knows everybody in an organization versus one who doesn't, even if the situation might change from one year to another, I would go with the guy who knows the language and who knows the people. So I think the Canadians would go in there if they were to draft Demidov. They wouldn't go in there with more knowledge about the player than other teams. So I think the whole risk regarding them wanting to keep players remain the same, no matter if it's the Canadians or any other team. But at least the knowledge of understanding what's the level of risk and are we willing to take it. I think that the Canadians are in a better spot because of Nick Bobrov than other teams.
Yeah, but that goes to it. I agree with everything you said. It's just it's worth keeping in mind, and I think the Canadians do, that sometimes having that information can have too big of an influence on the decision that you make, and that you have to consider where that information is coming from, why it's coming, what are the decisions behind that information, and do we agree with those decisions? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it can kind of poison the bank of information you have if you put too much of an emphasis on it without knowing the source, which I don't think the Canadians do, but I think it's a danger that they're aware of and they're cognizant of. And so yes, they get maybe some information that other teams don't, but they try to keep it in context and try to keep their own evaluations pure and objective, despite having that additional information. Let's take one of the email questions. This comes from Bill in California, soon to be Minnesota. Says, sounds like the asking price for Natchez and Zegras. First of all, I got to say that everyone who emails in or goes on Twitter or X to mention how you are linked to Newfoundland to try and get your question onto the show. We do not have we do not have a Newfoundland bias here. We are not. It just so happens that questions that we chose really twice or maybe three times happen to be from Newfoundlanders. We love Newfoundlanders. Don't get us wrong, but you don't need to say like, for instance, Neil Terrio, who asked a question that unfortunately we're not going to get to today, but he said, son of a Newfoundlander, if that helps. We had someone else from Nova Scotia say, if it helps to say I'm from Newfoundland, I'm from Newfoundland, but I'm really from Nova Scotia. So, tell us where you're from. You don't have to pretend to be from Newfoundland to get on the show. We accept all maritime provinces and really anywhere to be just as valuable as anywhere else. So Bill is from California, soon to be in Minnesota. Sounds like the asking price for Natchez and Zegras are too high, as we've discussed, at least for my liking. What do you think the Habs would have to offer to get a quote-unquote lesser piece like Cole Perfetti from the Winnipeg Jets? What's interesting about Winnipeg is you really get the sense that the way Rick Bowness viewed Cole Perfetti and the way management views Cole Perfetti, there was a bit of a disconnect there. And Perfetti didn't get many opportunities under Rick Bowness. Hell, he didn't dress for the playoffs until deep into the series, right? And so obviously Bowness is gone now, but has been replaced by his assistant. So how much of a change are we going to see there? That's the question. Like if they had brought in someone from the outside, that would have been, was it Scott Arniel who got the job? Sorry, his name escaped me momentarily there, but it's, how much of a change are we going to see there? So is he actually available? I don't know, but it's kind of on the smaller side. Like I don't know what the appetite would be for the Jets to trade him. The Canadians might see him as not being the ideal fit to their forward group. But I still think the Jets would ask for a pretty significant price. Maybe they'd want their old pick back. Maybe they'd want the 26th overall pick back. And
I want all my picks back, all of them.
Jeez. But yeah, so but I don't think.
Sorry, I'm just quoting draft day.
Right. Yes. Exactly. I don't know if the Canadians would necessarily see that as a fit.
No, and I don't think that Perfetti's going to be traded. I'd be surprised. I mean, the number of guys that are in Winnipeg that are in the last year of their contract, there's going to be quite a turnaround in the next year. And having a guy who's you invested a first round pick in this guy, 10th overall. He's 22 years old. He's still under team control for a number of years, and there's still plenty of time to develop him into the player that you want him to become. I'd be surprised if they were. I mean, yes, he's an RFA now. He's in need of a second contract, and sometimes it's the time to consider how much you want to commit yourself. But I wouldn't be surprised if he just signed a bridge deal and they tried to make it work. And your point about the change of coaching of the head coach might be a welcome change for Perfetti and maybe additional opportunities. So, and also,
I just feel like it would have been to have someone come in from the outside would have helped even more, though. I don't know. I don't know the extent to which the change in coach is going to change much because Scott Arniel was part of the decision-making process that scratched Cole Perfetti in the playoffs. Like I don't know the extent to which.
Yeah, but ultimately, he's not the guy. He was not the decision maker. The head coach looms large, and
right. But he's not. But
I don't know.
I'm just saying, Perfetti's not benefiting from a totally clean slate. Is all I'm saying. There's already a history with this guy.
No.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's do a couple more and we'll wrap this up. So Devin from Nova Scotia, That guy.
Yeah.
On email. Yeah. So he said, what, based on what you've both seen and heard, do you think Caden Lindstrom does better than Beckett Sennecke? It's an interesting question because when you go one criteria after another, Senneca's got a lot of things going for him. But I think that the speed is really the one thing that Lindstrom has. The combination of size and speed is really at Lindstrom's advantage compared to Sennecke. I think that there's a level also of a power forward mentality to the style of player that also favors Lindstrom, because he's always been a big kid, always been always dominated through his physicality. So he's grown into knowing the sort of player that he would be. When you have a guy who grows late like Sennecke has, it reminds me of Guillaume Latendresse, who was also back in his day had ended up being like a bigger guy with a smaller player's skill set. So because he had a late growth,
big. Well, he didn't really have a late growth.
No.
I mean, when he was 15,
No. Latendresse had a late growth. He explained at some point that
he played midget AAA
in his
at
newer
14.
body, all of his. Yeah, I know.
I saw him play at 14. He was huge. People were bouncing off him when he was 14 years old. It's not comparable to
Really?
Guillaume Latendresse. I saw him play at Charles Lemoine when he was 14 years old, and he was a physically dominant player. People in the midget AAA league were bouncing off him. It was just like,
because I remember him explaining how with the physical with the body that he had now, they expected him to be physical, and he said that's not the type of player that I am. But anyway,
well, that's true, but it's not because he grew late. I mean, that's true, but he had that anyhow. We don't need to get into it, but he had that body at a pretty young age. I mean, he played midget AAA a year early, which is very rare, and so
right.
And I saw him play more than once in that game. I wrote a story about him and his brother when they were 14 and 15, and I would guys would take runs at Guillaume Latendresse, and he didn't have to do anything because they would just literally they would hit him and fall. So he was a big kid, but yeah. Anyhow. But anyhow, to answer, but further to the question, it's the meanness in Lindstrom. Like that's, I think, where you were going with that. Is that he has a certain meanness to him, an aggression and a disdain for his opponents when he plays that you really see. When he hits someone, he hits them hard. Like he hits to hurt. And that's a quality that Lindstrom brings for sure. He needs to rein it in a little bit. He's a little penalty prone. He takes bad penalties at times, but yeah, it's I think something that he has over Sennecke as well.
Yeah. But Sennecke should be a top 10 pick. There are many.
There's no doubt.
There are more than 10 guys that are top 10 picks.
yeah, exactly. Like someone's gonna. Well, that's the thing is that's why that's why it's so interesting that Jersey and Buffalo has openly shopping their picks at 10 and 11, because you're going to get one of those top 10 talents who are going to fall out, whether that's Yakimchuk, maybe Dickinson, maybe Catton, maybe someone who everyone steals is a top 10 talent will be available outside the top 10. And so, we don't have to speculate with Jersey. Tom Fitzgerald has said openly that pick is available. If he uses it to acquire a Jacob Markstrom, then Calgary's could be picking 9 and 10, which would be really interesting for them. And Buffalo seems to be in a place where they want to probably trade their pick to get some more immediate help. As my colleague in Buffalo, Matt Fairburn, wrote quite astutely, there's prospect fatigue in Buffalo. Yeah. So they need some more immediate help. So you're going to get a good player at those spots, or Philly at 12 or whatever. Those picks in the early teens, you could get someone who otherwise in a normal year would have gone in the top 10.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this up here. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back next Monday. So enjoy your week, everybody. Enjoy your week, Arpin.
Same to you.
Yeah, I will. I'm back home, man. Enough of Buffalo. Thank goodness. All right.
Oh, wait.
See you, everybody.
Before we go, there was a question that I wanted to address. For the record, the Freddie Mercury lookalike was not at the hotel. So we were upset about that, but he was not there. But otherwise, the cast of characters were all pretty much consistent. So shout out to the people at the Marriott. Yeah.
Yeah. Ian, the security guard with the legendary hair, who was giving fist bumps to everybody, all the kids. I saw him in a long chat with Arten Levshinov. Was it Friday or after the physical test on Saturday? Like they chatted for a good 10-12 minutes, and everybody seems to know the guy, and he was quite a character. I should post the I had a picture taken with him, and the funny story is that the guy who took the picture was Berkeley Catton. So
Marc-Antoine will put the picture out on our Twitter, but it's he was fist bumping a bunch of the prospects, and I kind of was walking behind him because the bathroom is in that area, and I was like, do I get a fist bump too? He's like, damn right you do, that's what I'm here for, fist bumps.
That's it.
Love that guy.
He was the first time he saw me this year. The first thing he said was in French. He remembered me from last year, knowing that I was part of the French bunch there.
Ian's got the pulse of the whole event. He's the MVP of the combine. He really is. Love you, Ian. All right, let's wrap it up here. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will talk to you next Monday. Thanks for listening.